Most people spend their entire lives chasing happiness, yet very few ever feel truly at peace. They chase money, approval, love, success, and distractions, believing that one more achievement will finally make them happy. But the Buddha taught something radically different. He taught that happiness is not something you find in the world. Happiness is something you cultivate within the mind. When the mind is trained correctly, even an ordinary life becomes deeply fulfilling. When the mind is untrained, even a perfect life feels empty. These teachings are not theories. They are practical truths meant to change how you see life, how you respond to pain, and how you experience joy. If you allow these lessons to settle into your awareness, you will begin to feel lighter, calmer, and more content, not because life becomes perfect, but because your relationship with life transforms. 1. Happiness comes from letting go, not holding on. The Buddha taught that the root of much of our suffering is attachment, not because attachment itself is evil, but because we cling to things as if they are permanent in a world that is constantly changing. We suffer not simply because things change, but because we expect them not to. We expect people to remain the same, situations to stay comfortable, emotions to last forever, and life to follow the story we have written in our minds. When reality moves in a different direction, pain arises. This pain is not always caused by the loss itself, but by the resistance we create inside when we refuse to accept what is happening. Human beings naturally form attachments. We attach to people we love, to roles we identify with, to success, to youth, to health, and even to our own ideas of who we think we are. We say, "This must stay," or "This should not end," or "I cannot be okay without this." The Buddha observed that this gripping of life creates fear even when things are going well, because deep down we know that nothing lasts forever. The more tightly we hold on, the more anxious we become about losing what we hold. Happiness built on attachment is fragile because it depends on conditions that are always outside our control. Everything in life follows the law of impermanence. Feelings rise and fall, relationships change, bodies age, circumstances shift. Even moments of joy are temporary by nature. When we do not understand this truth deeply, we live in constant tension, trying to freeze moments that cannot be frozen. We replay memories, resist endings, and cling to expectations, believing that holding on harder will protect us from pain. In reality, this only multiplies suffering because we are fighting against the natural flow of life. When you begin to understand impermanence, not just intellectually but emotionally, something softens inside you. You stop gripping life with fear. You begin to hold experiences gently rather than desperately. You still love, you still care, you still enjoy, but you no longer demand permanence from what is temporary. You learn to fully appreciate moments while they are present, knowing they will pass, just as all moments do. This awareness does not make life dull or cold. It makes it precious. When you stop trying to possess happiness, you start to experience it more fully. Letting go does not mean becoming detached in a cold or indifferent way. The Buddha never taught emotional numbness. Letting go means releasing the illusion of control. It means understanding that love does not require ownership, that joy does not require clinging, and that peace does not require certainty. You can care deeply without suffocating. You can love fully without fear of loss controlling your heart. You can commit to life without demanding guarantees. Many people misunderstand letting go as giving up or withdrawing from life. In truth, it is the opposite. When you let go of attachment, you engage with life more openly and more honestly. You stop exhausting yourself by trying to control people, outcomes, and futures that were never in your hands to begin with. You accept that change is not a mistake, but a fundamental part of existence. With this acceptance, resistance dissolves, and with it, much of our inner suffering. True happiness arises when you allow life to flow rather than trying to force it into a fixed shape. When you stop saying, "This must stay for me to be okay," and begin saying, "I can be at peace even as things change," your inner world becomes stable. Peace no longer depends on people behaving a certain way or situations remaining comfortable. It comes from trust that you can meet each moment as it comes without needing to own it, freeze it, or control it. The Buddha taught that nothing in this world needs to be possessed for peace to exist. Peace is not found in holding tightly, but in loosening the grip. When you stop clinging, you stop fearing loss. When you stop fearing loss, you begin to live more freely. And in that freedom, happiness arises naturally, quietly, and deeply, not as something you chase, but as something you allow. If you want, I can now. 2. A calm mind is more valuable than any possession. The Buddha taught that a calm and steady mind is one of the greatest treasures a human being can have, yet it is often the most neglected. Many people spend their lives trying to improve their external conditions, believing that happiness will come once they earn more money, gain more recognition, or secure a more comfortable lifestyle. While these things may bring temporary relief or pleasure, the Buddha observed that none of them can bring lasting peace if the mind remains restless. A disturbed mind turns even abundance into a source of anxiety, while a calm mind can find contentment in the simplest circumstances. A restless mind is constantly pulled in different directions. It worries about the future, replays the past, and rarely settles in the present moment. Even when something good happens, the restless mind cannot fully enjoy it, because it is already afraid of losing it or distracted by what comes next. This is why the Buddha emphasized that inner peace is more important than external success. Without a calm mind, wealth brings fear, relationships bring attachment, and achievements bring pressure. With a calm mind, even ordinary moments feel meaningful and sufficient. The Buddha did not teach that material possessions are wrong or that comfort should be avoided. Instead, he taught that dependence on possessions is what creates suffering. When your peace depends on having something, that peace becomes fragile. It can be taken away at any moment by loss, change, or circumstances beyond your control. A calm mind, however, is not dependent on external conditions. It remains stable whether things go well or poorly. This inner stability is what the Buddha pointed to as true wealth. When the mind is calm, your relationship with life changes. Praise does not inflate your ego, and criticism does not destroy your self-worth. Success does not make you arrogant, and failure does not make you hopeless. You begin to see experiences clearly, without exaggeration or distortion. This clarity allows you to respond wisely instead of reacting emotionally. The Buddha taught that much of human suffering comes not from events themselves, but from the uncontrolled reactions of the mind. Calmness breaks this cycle. A calm mind also creates space between thought and reaction, space between emotion and action. In that space, freedom appears. You are no longer pushed around by anger, fear, or desire. Instead of being ruled by impulses, you become aware of them. Instead of suppressing emotions, you observe them with understanding. This observation weakens their grip on you. Over time, the mind learns that it does not need to panic, rush, or cling in order to survive. The Buddha taught practices such as mindfulness and meditation not to escape life, but to train the mind to rest naturally. When the mind learns how to settle, it begins to experience a quiet joy that does not depend on entertainment, stimulation, or validation. This joy is subtle but deep. It does not excite the senses, but it nourishes the heart. It is the kind of happiness that remains even in silence, even in solitude, even when nothing special is happening. Many people fear calmness because they associate it with boredom or emptiness. The Buddha taught the opposite. Calmness is not emptiness. It is fullness without noise. It is clarity without tension. When the mind is calm, you become more alive, not less. You notice small details. You listen more deeply. You move through life with less resistance. Calmness allows you to experience life directly, without the constant interference of mental chatter. A calm mind is also a source of strength. When difficulties arise, and they always do, a calm mind does not collapse. It bends without breaking. It acknowledges pain without being overwhelmed by it. This resilience is far more valuable than any possession, because possessions can be lost, but inner stability stays with you wherever you go. The Buddha taught that when you cultivate a calm mind, you carry your happiness within you, independent of circumstances. True peace does not come from arranging the world perfectly. It comes from understanding the mind and learning to rest within it. When the mind is calm, life becomes lighter. Problems still exist, but they no longer dominate your inner world. And in that calmness, the Buddha taught, true happiness quietly takes root and grows. 3. Do not chase happiness, create inner peace. The Buddha taught that one of the greatest misunderstandings of human life is the belief that happiness must be chased. From a young age, we are taught that happiness exists somewhere in the future, waiting for us to arrive at it. We believe that once we achieve a certain goal, reach a certain status, or obtain a certain thing, happiness will finally appear. Yet the Buddha observed that this endless chasing keeps the mind restless and dissatisfied, because happiness is always placed just beyond reach. As long as happiness is treated as a destination, peace remains absent from the present moment. Chasing happiness creates a subtle form of suffering because it conditions the mind to reject what is happening now. The present moment is treated as incomplete, as something that must be endured rather than lived. The mind becomes focused on what is missing instead of what is already here. Even during pleasant experiences, the chasing mind cannot fully relax because it is constantly asking, "Is this enough?" Or, "What comes next?" The Buddha taught that this habit of always reaching forward prevents the heart from settling into contentment. Inner peace, unlike happiness, is not dependent on circumstances. It does not require life to unfold in a particular way. Inner peace arises when the mind stops arguing with reality. When you stop demanding that life provide constant pleasure, excitement, or certainty, something quiet and stable begins to form within you. The Buddha taught that peace is not something you add to your life, but something you uncover when you stop resisting what already is. When you create inner peace, happiness arises naturally as a byproduct, not as a goal. This happiness is different from excitement or pleasure. It is steady, gentle, and resilient. It does not disappear when circumstances change. It remains present even during difficult moments because it is rooted in acceptance rather than conditions. The Buddha emphasized that peace comes first and happiness follows. When the mind is peaceful, it does not need constant stimulation to feel alive. The practice of presence plays a central role in this teaching. The Buddha taught that inner peace can only exist in the present moment, because the present moment is the only place where life is actually happening. The past exists as memory, and the future exists as imagination. When the mind continuously lives in regret or anticipation, it disconnects from reality. By gently bringing attention back to the present, the mind begins to rest. In that resting, peace emerges. Many people fear that if they stop chasing happiness, they will become unmotivated or passive. The Buddha taught the opposite. When action arises from peace rather than craving, it becomes more balanced and effective. You still work, grow, and improve, but without desperation. You act because it is appropriate, not because you believe your worth or happiness depends on the outcome. This shift removes pressure and allows effort to flow naturally. Inner peace also changes how you relate to discomfort. Instead of immediately trying to escape unpleasant feelings, you learn to sit with them patiently. You observe them without judgment, understanding that they, like all things, are temporary. This reduces fear and increases emotional resilience. The Buddha taught that when you stop running from discomfort, it loses much of its power over you. Peace grows when you realize that you can remain present even when life feels imperfect. As inner peace deepens, the need to chase happiness fades. You no longer look outside yourself for constant reassurance or fulfillment. You begin to trust your own inner stability. Life becomes something you participate in rather than something you struggle against. The simple act of being becomes enough. The Buddha taught that this is the beginning of true freedom, when happiness is no longer something you pursue, but something that quietly accompanies you as you move through life. 4. Your thoughts shape your world. The Buddha taught that the mind is the foundation of all experience. Long before an event affects your life, your thoughts shape how that event is felt inside you. Two people can live through the same situation, yet experience it in completely different ways, not because reality is different, but because their minds interpret it differently. This is why the Buddha emphasized training the mind above changing external conditions. When the mind is untrained, life feels overwhelming. When the mind is trained, life becomes manageable, even peaceful. Thoughts arise constantly, often without our awareness. Many people assume that whatever appears in the mind must be true, important, or worthy of attention. The Buddha taught that this belief is one of the main causes of suffering. Thoughts are not facts. They are mental events that come and go, shaped by past experiences, fears, desires, and conditioning. When you identify with every thought, you give it power over your emotions and actions. When you learn to observe thoughts instead of obeying them, freedom begins. A negative thought, when believed, can darken an entire day. A fearful thought can create anxiety even when there is no real danger. A judgmental thought can damage relationships without a single word being spoken. The Buddha observed that suffering often does not come from what happens to us, but from the stories the mind tells about what happens. These stories create inner worlds of stress, resentment, and worry that feel real, even when they are based on imagination. The Buddha taught mindfulness as a way to see thoughts clearly. When you watch the mind without judgment, you begin to notice patterns. You see how certain thoughts repeat themselves, how they rise, peak, and fade away. This observation reveals something important. Thoughts are impermanent. They do not stay unless you feed them with attention. When you stop reacting automatically, thoughts lose their grip. The mind becomes quieter, not because thoughts disappear, but because you are no longer trapped by them. This awareness creates choice. Instead of being pushed by every mental impulse, you gain the ability to respond wisely. You can choose whether a thought deserves attention or whether it can be released. Over time, this changes the emotional landscape of your life. Fear weakens, anger softens, gratitude becomes more natural. The Buddha taught that when the mind is purified of harmful thought patterns, happiness grows effortlessly. Your inner world shapes how you see the outer world. A mind filled with suspicion sees enemies everywhere. A mind filled with appreciation notices beauty even in simple things. When you cultivate wholesome thoughts, such as kindness, patience, and understanding, your experience of life transforms. The Buddha did not teach positive thinking as denial, but as awareness combined with wisdom. You do not pretend that pain does not exist. You simply refuse to add unnecessary suffering through destructive thinking. The Buddha also taught that thoughts influence actions and actions shape destiny. A thought repeated becomes a habit repeated becomes character, character shapes the direction of your life. When you become aware of this chain, you realize how powerful the mind truly is. Changing your inner dialogue slowly changes how you speak, act, and relate to others. Over time, your entire life reflects the quality of your thoughts. Learning to work with the mind is a gradual process. The Buddha did not expect instant control or perfection. He encouraged patience and gentle awareness. Each moment you notice a thought without reacting, you weaken old patterns. Each moment you choose clarity over impulse, you strengthen peace. This is how inner transformation happens, quietly and steadily. When you understand that your thoughts shape your world, you stop blaming life for your inner struggles. You turn inward with curiosity instead of judgment. The mind becomes a place of learning rather than conflict. And as the Buddha taught, when the mind is trained, happiness is no longer dependent on circumstances. It becomes a natural expression of clarity, understanding, and inner freedom. 5. Suffering less begins with wanting less. The Buddha taught that much of human suffering does not come from what we lack, but from what we believe we must have in order to be happy. The mind is constantly creating desires, some small and harmless, others powerful and exhausting. We want more comfort, more success, more recognition, more certainty, and more pleasure. While desire itself is natural, the Buddha observed that unchecked craving keeps the mind restless and dissatisfied. As long as happiness depends on getting more, peace remains out of reach. Craving is different from simple need. A need can be fulfilled, but craving never feels complete. When one desire is satisfied, another quickly replaces it. This creates an endless cycle of wanting, achieving, and wanting again. The Buddha saw that this cycle keeps people trapped in dissatisfaction, even when their lives appear successful on the surface. The problem is not that we enjoy things, but that we expect enjoyment to last and define our sense of fulfillment. Wanting less does not mean rejecting life or denying yourself basic comfort. The Buddha taught moderation, not deprivation. Wanting less means becoming aware of which desires truly serve your well-being and which only create mental agitation. Many desires are inherited from society, comparison, and fear, not from genuine need. When you question these desires, instead of automatically obeying them, the mind begins to relax. You realize that many things you chase are not actually necessary for peace. The constant pursuit of more creates pressure, pressure to keep up, pressure to maintain appearances, pressure to protect what you have gained. Even when goals are achieved, the mind remains tense because it fears loss. The Buddha taught that true contentment arises when the mind is no longer dependent on accumulation. When you reduce unnecessary wanting, you reduce fear. When fear reduces, peace naturally expands. Simplicity plays a key role in this teaching. A simpler life is not an empty life. It is a clearer life. When you remove excess desires, distractions, and expectations, you create space to experience what is already present. You notice the quiet satisfaction of enough time, enough resources, enough connection. This sense of enough is deeply liberating. It frees the mind from constant comparison and self-judgment. The Buddha also taught that wanting less strengthens gratitude. When the mind is not obsessed with what is missing, it becomes aware of what is already here. Gratitude shifts attention from lack to abundance. It does not mean ignoring difficulties, but it prevents difficulties from overshadowing everything else. A grateful mind experiences life more gently, even during challenges. Reducing desire also changes how you respond to disappointment. When expectations are fewer, disappointments are lighter. the mind becomes more flexible and resilient. Instead of feeling defeated when things do not go as planned, you adapt more easily. The Buddha taught that suffering intensifies when desire meets reality and refuses to adjust. Letting go of rigid expectations allows you to move with life instead of against it. Over time, wanting less creates inner freedom. You are no longer constantly pulled toward the next thing or pushed away from discomfort. The mind settles. Joy becomes quieter but deeper. You begin to enjoy experiences without clinging to them. You appreciate success without being defined by it. You face loss without being destroyed by it. This balance is the heart of the Buddha's teaching. The Buddha taught that true wealth is not measured by how much you possess, but by how little you need. When wanting less becomes a natural state rather than a forced effort, suffering decreases on its own. Peace grows without being chased. Happiness appears not as excitement, but as contentment. And in this contentment, life feels lighter, more spacious, and deeply sufficient. 6. Learn to accept pain without adding resistance. The Buddha taught that pain is an unavoidable part of human life. No one escapes loss, illness, disappointment, aging, or change. Pain arises naturally whenever life moves in a way we did not expect or desire. Yet the Buddha made a powerful distinction between pain and suffering. Pain is the initial experience that happens to us. Suffering is what the mind creates when it resists that experience. When we do not understand this difference, we add unnecessary layers of suffering to pain that is already difficult. Resistance often appears as mental argument. The mind asks why this is happening, why it happened to me, or how it should not be this way. We replay the event repeatedly, analyze it endlessly, and imagine different outcomes. This mental struggle does not remove pain, it intensifies it. The Buddha observed that much of human misery comes not from pain itself, but from our refusal to accept reality as it is in that moment. Acceptance does not mean liking pain or pretending it does not hurt. The Buddha never taught denial. Acceptance means allowing the experience to exist without fighting it. When pain arises, instead of tightening the body and tensing the mind, you soften awareness and observe what is present. You notice sensations, emotions, and thoughts as they come and go. This gentle awareness prevents pain from turning into overwhelming suffering. Many people fear acceptance because they believe it means giving up or becoming passive. The Buddha taught the opposite. Acceptance is an act of wisdom, not weakness. When you stop wasting energy resisting what has already happened, you regain clarity. With clarity, you can respond skillfully rather than react emotionally. Acceptance creates the mental space needed for healing, problem-solving, and growth. Pain becomes heavier when it is personalized. The mind says, "This should not have happened to me," or "I cannot handle this." These thoughts isolate us and make pain feel unbearable. The Buddha taught that pain is part of the shared human condition. Understanding this does not remove pain, but it removes the feeling of being alone in it. Compassion for oneself arises naturally when pain is met with understanding rather than judgment. The Buddha also taught that all experiences, including painful ones, are impermanent. Pain does not stay the same. It changes in intensity, shape, and duration. When you observe pain without resistance, you begin to see this impermanence directly. This awareness brings relief because the mind stops believing that the current pain will last forever. Even in difficult moments, this understanding provides hope and steadiness. Accepting pain without resistance also deepens inner strength. Each time you meet discomfort with calm awareness, you train the mind to remain stable under pressure. Over time, this creates resilience. You become less afraid of difficult emotions because you trust your ability to experience them without being destroyed by them. The Buddha taught that this inner confidence is a key foundation of lasting peace. Life does not become free of pain through acceptance, but it becomes free of unnecessary suffering. When resistance drops, pain moves through more quickly and leaves less damage behind. You stop carrying old wounds into the present. You stop reliving past hurts in the mind. Each moment is met as it is, not as a continuation of previous suffering. The Buddha taught that peace is not found by avoiding pain, but by changing how we relate to it. When pain is met with awareness, patience, and compassion, it loses its power to dominate the mind. Happiness becomes possible even in the presence of difficulty because the heart is no longer at war with reality. This acceptance is not resignation, it is freedom. 7. Compassion creates inner happiness. The Buddha taught that compassion is not only a moral virtue, but a direct source of inner happiness. Many people believe happiness comes from being admired, achieving success, or protecting themselves from others. The Buddha observed the opposite. A heart that is closed, guarded, and filled with resentment becomes heavy and restless. A heart that is open, understanding, and compassionate becomes light and peaceful. Compassion is not something we give away and lose. It is something that expands within us and transforms how we experience life. Compassion begins with understanding. When you see clearly that all beings experience suffering in different forms, judgment naturally softens. People act out of fear, confusion, pain, and unmet needs. This does not mean harmful behavior should be accepted or ignored, but it does mean it can be understood without hatred. The Buddha taught that hatred never ends hatred. Only understanding and compassion can dissolve it. When the heart stops holding on to anger, it releases a heavy burden that was never benefiting you in the first place. Many people confuse compassion with weakness. The Buddha taught that true compassion requires strength. It takes strength to remain kind when hurt. It takes courage to respond with understanding instead of revenge. Compassion does not mean allowing others to mistreat you. It means refusing to poison your own mind with bitterness. You can set boundaries and still keep your heart free from hatred. This balance is what creates inner peace. Compassion also begins with yourself. The Buddha emphasized self-compassion as a foundation for genuine kindness toward others. When you judge yourself harshly, you carry tension and shame that affects how you relate to the world. Self-compassion allows you to acknowledge mistakes without destroying your self-worth. It creates a safe inner space where growth becomes possible. A mind that is gentle with itself becomes naturally gentle with others. The Buddha taught loving-kindness practices not as rituals, but as mental training. When you intentionally cultivate thoughts of goodwill, patience, and care, the emotional tone of the mind changes. Over time, these qualities become habitual. The mind begins to default to understanding rather than hostility. This shift reduces inner conflict and creates a sense of ease that does not depend on external approval. Compassion transforms relationships. When you listen deeply, forgive imperfections, and approach others with curiosity instead of judgment, connection grows, misunderstandings soften. Conflicts lose their intensity. Even when relationships end or change, compassion allows you to part without bitterness. The Buddha taught that relationships rooted in compassion bring far less suffering than those rooted in attachment, control, or expectation. Compassion also expands your sense of purpose. When life is not only about protecting the self, it becomes more meaningful. Acts of kindness, no matter how small, create moments of connection that nourish the heart. Helping others does not drain you when it arises from genuine compassion. It energizes you because it aligns the mind with values that reduce ego-driven tension. Over time, compassion reshapes how you experience the world. You become less reactive, less defensive, and less isolated. The mind becomes softer, more spacious, and more resilient. Even in difficult situations, compassion provides a sense of inner stability. The Buddha taught that a compassionate mind rests more easily because it is not constantly at war with others or with itself. True happiness, as the Buddha described, is not excitement or constant pleasure. It is the quiet joy of a heart that is free from resentment, hatred, and cruelty. Compassion clears these inner obstacles. When the heart is compassionate, peace flows naturally, and in that peace, happiness quietly takes root and grows. 8. Live fully in the present moment. The Buddha taught that the present moment is the only place where life truly unfolds, yet it is the place most people rarely inhabit. The mind is often trapped in memories of the past or worries about the future, replaying what has already happened or imagining what might go wrong. When attention leaves the present moment, life continues, but we are no longer fully there to experience it. The Buddha observed that much of human dissatisfaction arises from this disconnection, not because life is lacking, but because awareness is elsewhere. Living in the past often appears as regret, guilt, or longing. The mind replays old conversations, mistakes, or lost opportunities, believing that thinking about them will somehow change them. Living in the future often appears as anxiety, fear, or constant planning. The mind imagines outcomes that have not happened yet and reacts emotionally as if they already have. The Buddha taught that both habits pull the mind away from reality and create unnecessary suffering. The present moment, by contrast, is always workable. It is where breathing happens, where movement happens, where awareness happens. Even in difficult situations, the present moment contains something that can be met with clarity. When attention returns to what is happening now, the mind begins to settle. This settling is not forced. It occurs naturally when the mind stops chasing thoughts across time. The Buddha taught mindfulness as the practice of returning to the present again and again. This does not mean forcing the mind to be blank or suppressing thoughts. It means gently noticing when attention has wandered and bringing it back without judgment. Each return strengthens awareness. Over time, the mind learns that it does not need to live in constant mental travel. It can rest in what is already here. When you live fully in the present moment, ordinary experiences become rich and meaningful. Eating becomes nourishing rather than rushed. Walking becomes grounding rather than automatic. Listening becomes an act of connection rather than waiting to speak. The Buddha taught that mindfulness transforms simple activities into opportunities for peace. Happiness does not require special conditions. It arises naturally when attention is complete. Many people fear that living in the present means ignoring responsibilities or the future. The Buddha taught otherwise. Planning still happens, but without anxiety. Reflection still happens, but without regret. When the mind is anchored in the present, actions become more skillful. You respond to situations based on what is actually happening, not on imagined fears or past wounds. This clarity improves decision-making and reduces unnecessary stress. Living in the present also softens emotional pain. When you focus on the current moment rather than the entire story of suffering, pain becomes more manageable. The mind stops adding layers of fear and interpretation. You experience what is happening now, not everything that has ever happened or might happen. This simplicity brings relief and steadiness. The Buddha taught that presence creates intimacy with life. You feel more connected to your body, your environment, and other people. Life feels less distant and mechanical. You notice beauty in small details that were previously overlooked. This awareness creates a quiet joy that does not depend on excitement or distraction. It is the joy of being fully alive. Over time, living in the present becomes less of an effort and more of a way of being. The mind spends less time wandering and more time resting. When awareness is stable, peace deepens. Happiness is no longer postponed until the future. It exists here and now, woven into ordinary moments. This is why the Buddha taught that liberation begins with simple awareness of the present moment. 9. Do not compare your path with others. The Buddha taught that comparison is one of the most subtle sources of unhappiness. The mind constantly measures itself against others, their success, their appearance, their progress, and their circumstances. Without noticing, we begin to believe that our worth is determined by how we stand in relation to others. The Buddha observed that this habit creates dissatisfaction even in lives that are otherwise comfortable, because comparison shifts attention away from understanding ourselves and toward judging ourselves. Every human life unfolds under different conditions. Different experiences, abilities, challenges, and timing shape each path. The Buddha taught that comparing lives is like comparing rivers. Each river flows through different landscapes, encounters different obstacles, and reaches the ocean in its own way. When you compare your journey to someone else's, you ignore the unique causes and conditions that shape your own life. This misunderstanding creates unnecessary self-criticism and envy. Comparison often disguises itself as motivation, but the Buddha saw that it more often leads to anxiety and resentment. When you compare upward, you feel inadequate. When you compare downward, you feel temporary superiority that quickly fades. Neither state brings peace. The mind remains restless because it is always looking outward for validation rather than inward for understanding. The Buddha taught that happiness grows when attention turns inward. When you focus on your own actions, intentions, and growth, the need to measure yourself against others naturally weakens. Progress becomes personal rather than competitive. You begin to ask whether you are living more wisely, more compassionately, and more peacefully than before, instead of whether you are ahead of someone else. Comparison also distorts reality. We tend to compare our inner struggles to other people's outer appearances. We see their highlights and measure them against our hidden doubts and fears. The Buddha taught that this creates a false sense of inferiority because we rarely see the full picture of another person's life. Everyone carries unseen struggles. Remembering this softens judgment and increases compassion. Letting go of comparison brings relief. You no longer feel pressured to match someone else's pace or achievements. You allow yourself to grow in alignment with your own values and capacities. This acceptance reduces inner tension and creates stability. The Buddha taught that contentment arises when the mind stops chasing external benchmarks and starts honoring its own path. Non-comparison also improves relationships. When envy and competition fade, appreciation becomes possible. You can celebrate others' successes without feeling threatened. You can learn from others without diminishing yourself. This openness strengthens connection and reduces isolation. The Buddha taught that a mind free from comparison rests more easily because it is not constantly measuring and defending itself. Over time, releasing comparison builds confidence rooted in authenticity rather than ego. You become less reactive to praise and criticism. Your sense of worth stabilizes. Life feels less like a race and more like a journey. The Buddha taught that liberation begins when you stop trying to become someone else and start fully inhabiting who you are. True happiness, according to the Buddha, does not come from being better than others, but from being at peace with yourself. When you release comparison, the mind becomes spacious. Gratitude replaces envy, understanding replaces judgment, and in this inner freedom, happiness grows quietly and naturally. 10. Freedom comes from knowing yourself. The Buddha taught that true freedom does not come from changing the world around you, but from understanding the nature of your own mind. Most people live their entire lives reacting automatically to thoughts, emotions, and impulses without ever truly knowing themselves. They believe they are their anger, their fear, their desires, their past, and their roles. The Buddha observed that this lack of self-understanding keeps people trapped in cycles of suffering, because they are controlled by forces they do not see clearly. Knowing yourself begins with awareness. Awareness of thoughts as thoughts, emotions as emotions, and sensations as sensations. The Buddha taught that when you observe the mind carefully, you begin to see that nothing inside you is as solid or permanent as it appears. Thoughts arise and fade, emotions surge and dissolve, moods shift. Even the sense of I changes depending on conditions. This insight is deeply liberating because it loosens the grip of identification. When you no longer believe that every thought defines you, the mind becomes lighter and more flexible. Many people spend their lives trying to protect an identity they have created. They defend opinions, cling to labels, and fear change because change threatens the image they hold of themselves. The Buddha taught that suffering intensifies when we mistake these temporary identities for our true nature. When you identify too strongly with who you think you are, every challenge feels personal and every change feels dangerous. Self-knowledge dissolves this fear by revealing that identity is fluid, not fixed. As self-awareness deepens, reactions begin to slow down. Instead of being immediately swept away by anger, desire, or fear, you notice these states as they arise. This noticing creates space. In that space, choice appears. You are no longer forced to act from habit or impulse. You can respond with wisdom, patience, or restraint. The Buddha taught that this ability to pause is a powerful form of freedom because it breaks unconscious patterns that keep suffering alive. Knowing yourself also brings honesty. You begin to see your own attachments, fears, and motivations without judgment. This honesty is not harsh, it is compassionate and clear. When you see your patterns clearly, you no longer need to deny them or project them onto others. Responsibility replaces blame. Growth replaces self-deception. The Buddha taught that liberation begins the moment we stop running from ourselves and start understanding ourselves. Self-knowledge also deepens compassion. When you recognize your own struggles, confusion, and vulnerability, you naturally understand others more deeply. Judgment softens, patience grows. You realize that everyone is navigating their own conditioning and pain. This understanding reduces conflict and isolation. The Buddha taught that wisdom and compassion are inseparable. As one grows, the other grows alongside it. As the illusion of a fixed self weakens, fear also weakens. Fear relies on the belief that there is something solid that can be threatened or destroyed. When you see that everything is changing, including the sense of self, fear loses its foundation. This does not make you careless, it makes you present. You engage with life more fully because you are no longer constantly protecting an image of yourself. The Buddha taught that true happiness arises when the mind is no longer enslaved by unconscious habits and false identities. Knowing yourself does not mean becoming self-obsessed. It means becoming free. Free from compulsive reactions, free from unnecessary fear, free from the endless need to defend, prove, or compare. This freedom is quiet, stable, and deeply peaceful. When you truly know yourself, life feels less threatening and more workable. Challenges become teachers instead of enemies. Emotions become messages instead of obstacles. Change becomes natural instead of frightening. The Buddha taught that this understanding is the doorway to lasting peace, a peace that does not depend on circumstances, and a happiness that cannot be taken away. The Buddha never promised a life without pain, struggle, or uncertainty. What he offered was something far more valuable, a way to live with clarity, peace, and inner freedom no matter what life brings. These teachings are not meant to be memorized or admired from a distance. They are meant to be lived, slowly, gently, and with patience. Each teaching points back to the same truth. Happiness is not something you find in the world, it is something you cultivate within the mind. When you learn to let go instead of cling, the heart becomes lighter. When you value calmness over possessions, the mind becomes steady. When you stop chasing happiness and begin creating inner peace, contentment naturally follows. When you understand how your thoughts shape your world, you stop being ruled by them. When you want less, suffering loosens its grip. When you accept pain without resistance, strength replaces fear. When compassion fills the heart, resentment fades. When you live fully in the present moment, life becomes rich and alive. When you stop comparing your path to others, self-acceptance grows. And when you truly know yourself, freedom becomes your natural state. These teachings do not demand perfection. The Buddha never asked you to become someone else. He invited you to see clearly, to be aware, and to meet life with wisdom rather than fear. Even small shifts in awareness can transform how you experience each day. Happiness, as the Buddha taught, is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, stable, and deeply rooted. It is the peace that remains when the mind stops fighting reality. You do not need to change your life overnight. Begin where you are, notice your thoughts, soften your grip, breathe into the present moment. Let compassion guide your actions. With time, these teachings begin to reshape the way you see yourself and the world. Life does not become free of challenges, but it becomes free of unnecessary suffering. The Buddha taught that liberation is possible here and now, not in some distant future. When the mind is understood, happiness is no longer something you chase. It becomes something you allow. And in that allowing, you discover a truly happy life, one grounded in peace, awareness, and inner freedom.